They didn't invite me out of love. They invited me to silence suspicion. The message arrived at 6:42 a.m., subject line. You are cordially invited to Richard Carter's 70th birthday celebration. No Dear Juliana, no warmth, no hint of reconciliation. Just a time, a place, and a name I've tried for years to detach from. I stared at the screen, the stillness of my penthouse almost unnerving. Outside, Boston stretched out in crisp October light, all clean angles and early fog. The place was minimalist, by design, quiet, a far cry from the noise I'd grown up in, both literal and emotional. I didn't have to go, but I kept reading anyway. Maison Élise, 7:30 p.m., formal attire. I blinked, lips parting slightly. Maison Élise. The irony of it struck me in the chest like a slow, quiet punch. I own that restaurant. Well, technically, the LLC did. On paper, the majority shares were under a private trust. No one in the Carter family knew, not even Lila, who sat now at my counter barefoot, sipping the matcha I'd made her 15 minutes ago. Let me guess. Another Carter gala, she asked without looking up from her tablet. I turned the screen toward her. She read the invite, then looked at me. They chose your restaurant. I nodded. They don't know. She let out a quiet laugh, more breath than sound. Of course they don't. The last family event I attended was Vanessa's engagement party. Her fiancé, some investment banker, with a perfect smile and no discernible soul, had raised his glass to the golden daughter of the Carter name. Someone had asked where I worked these days. Someone else had answered for me. Didn't Jules try to launch? What was it? A food blog or a juice brand? They'd laughed. I'd left, quietly, through the kitchen. Do you want to go? Lila's voice was softer now. No. But you will. I hesitated. Why? Because this time they're walking into your space, Jules. And they don't even know it. She leaned forward. It's not about proving anything. It's about watching them realize they were wrong without you saying a word. I sat with that. Not just the words, but the way she said them. Calm, certain, and right. By noon, I'd replied to the email, "Accept with pleasure, Miss Juliana Carter." The wording made my jaw tighten. Later that evening, I stood before my wardrobe. Everything was either too bold or too soft. I settled on a simple black dress, long sleeve, clean lines, no embellishment. Not for modesty, for defense. The following night, the wind had picked up. October on Commonwealth Avenue could be bitter when it wanted to be. My driver pulled into the valet lane. Maison Élise's warm lighting spilled through tall glass panes, golden and inviting. I stepped out slowly, heels clicking softly on the pavement. The host outside didn't recognize me. That was the point. I walked past the marble fountain into the restaurant I'd spent 2 years secretly curating every chair, every wine glass, every chandelier. Not as owner, as guest. I didn't flinch. Inside the lobby was crowded. Waiters weaved through tight pockets of conversation. String music played low in the background. Everything was as I'd designed it. And yet, I stood unseen in it, until her voice sliced through the noise. Well, well, came Vanessa's syrupy tone. I turned. She stood by the check-in podium in a crimson silk dress that looked expensive and uncomfortably tight. Her eyes dragged over my outfit. Didn't think you could afford valet these days. They strutted in like royalty. I followed like a shadow they forgot to erase. The maitre d' led me through the main corridor, my heels nearly silent against the dark hardwood. Golden light spilled across the walls, catching the edges of velvet upholstery and brass-framed paintings. Every element of this room had passed through my hands, sketched, approved, placed. And yet, here I was, unseen. "You'll never belong here," Vanessa had whispered to me once, her 14-year-old voice full of venom and certainty. She'd been wearing a tiara from some pageant. I'd been sitting on the stairs, not invited to the photo. She was wrong. But she had no idea how wrong. Tonight's private dining room was a long, candle-lit expanse, with a floral centerpiece that ran the length of the table. White orchids and soft blue hydrangeas. Chef Mateo insisted they brought calm to the space. I'd agreed, though I doubted tonight's guests would notice. My mother did, however, notice my dress. Well, Elaine began, her eyes dragging slowly from my shoulders to my shoes. I'm surprised it's not thrifted, but I suppose black does hide things well. I smiled faintly. It does. Like intentions. She blinked at me, confused, then turned to adjust the napkin on her lap as if the folds might realign her control. Richard sat 2 seats from her, already disgruntled. He held the wine menu like it was a personal offense. $300 for a Syrah. This place thinks it's in Paris. I didn't correct him. Vanessa slid into the seat directly across from me, her diamond bracelet catching the light like it wanted to mock someone. Likely me. We just came back from the Langdon Gala, she said loud enough for the room. Wonderful crowd, senators, CEOs, even a few actual artists. Funny you weren't there, Jules. But I guess they don't email bloggers. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. Camille, the sommelier, approached just then, poised elegant, not missing a beat. Water for Miss Carter, she said with a calm, crisp tone, setting the crystal glass gently before me. Then softer, she leaned a fraction closer. Chef Mateo asked if you'd like the burgundy pairings tonight. I nodded, once grateful for the question and what it meant. Behind Camille, Gavin Holt stood near the service door, arms crossed loosely, eyes scanning the table. Our eyes met for a second. He gave a nod. Subtle, respectful, slightly too formal. He began walking toward the head of the table. Evening, Miss Carter. Gavin said, voice even but direct. The room stilled. Not long, just enough for the ripple of curiosity to pass across Vanessa's face. She squinted. Do you two know each other? Gavin didn't flinch. Only by reputation. He turned and left before she could follow up. I could feel her watching me, calculating, but she said nothing. The conversation resumed with small talk and clinking glasses. I tuned most of it out: corporate reshuffles, vacation plans, something about a new condo Richard was considering in Naples. My fork toyed with a slice of beet carpaccio untouched. From this end of the table, the world looked different. Less curated, more revealing. I glanced around. Staff moved with purpose, quiet efficiency. They weren't playing roles. They were doing their jobs with pride. I'd built that culture here. I'd insisted on it. And still, none of these people knew the truth. Not yet. Vanessa whispered something to Mother and laughed. I caught only a word: irrelevant. But that was enough. I took a sip of water and let the chill settle on my tongue. Funny. I've always preferred this view from the edges. They say blood is thicker than water. But even blood can stain. The clatter of forks on porcelain dulled into silence as the second course was cleared. Between bites and brittle laughter, a lull settled over the table. A soft, deceptive quiet, like the stillness before a storm. I reached for my glass of Bordeaux, swirling it slowly, watching the crimson legs trail down the side. I preferred this moment to the noise. It gave people room to reveal what they didn't say out loud. Vanessa never liked quiet, though. She prowled through it like a cat desperate to pounce. She leaned forward, her voice light, but sharp enough to pierce. Remember that line, Cook? You dated Ethan, wasn't it? Her tone was laced with performative amusement. Mom always said he looked like he smelled of garlic. The room didn't freeze, but my pulse did. My fingers didn't tremble, though. I made sure of it. I took another sip of wine and offered a non-committal smile, one I'd mastered long ago. Didn't you meet him once? I asked, softly turning to her. At that little bistro on Tremont. Vanessa's smirk deepened. Briefly. I think I was there to deliver your tuition refund paperwork after you dropped out. Culinary school wasn't for everyone. Her eyes gleamed like she'd scored a point. That was the lie she liked to tell. That I had crumbled. That I'd failed. What she didn't say, what no one at this table ever had the decency to acknowledge, was that I left because Ethan was fired. Not for incompetence, but because Vanessa exposed our relationship to our father. She'd found one of our texts. Just one. A quiet little message. Dinner tonight after service. She showed it to Richard, knowing how much he detested fraternization, especially with staff. Ethan was gone the next day. No explanation, no appeal. Just gone. She acted like it was all coincidence. I watched her now, still cloaked in pearls and pride, still drawing blood with her smile. And I remembered everything she cost me, not just Ethan, but the one person who made that season of my life feel like it was mine. I wondered for a moment if Ethan ever thought about that day, if he blamed me for not defending him louder. I'd always thought silence was strength, but sometimes silence just sounds like complicity. Across the room, Gavin reappeared. "Everything to your liking," he asked to the table, but his eyes found mine. I nodded once. Barely a movement. Vanessa followed his gaze. "Funny," she said to no one, "but loud enough the staff here are very attentive." Gavin smiled politely and withdrew. I knew she was watching. Vanessa, who'd never missed a flicker out of place, narrowed her eyes just slightly. A flicker of suspicion lit behind them. But I'd grown fluent in restraint. She tilted her glass and studied the wine like it held secrets. Then she tilted her mouth. "I suppose some people just attract help. You always were the charitable type." The burn settled deep, not because of what she said, but because of what I knew she meant. She wanted me to flinch. She wanted to own the room again. I straightened my posture and spoke calmly, clearly. "Ethan had more class in his apron than you ever had in your pearls." The table froze. Elaine looked horrified. Richard seemed more confused than anything. Vanessa laughed, but not like before. It was short, dry, clipped. She leaned toward Mother, not bothering to whisper. "Something's off." Even the staff act like they know her. I caught the reflection of myself in the polished silverware. Calm, still, silent, and yet the current was shifting. They didn't see it? Not yet. But soon they would. They devoured each dish like royalty. I savored mine like evidence. The lights had dimmed just slightly enough to warm the room in a golden hush. Wine glasses were refilled with an ease that only privilege could normalize. The conversation, once sharp and performative, had mellowed into a lull of indulgent chatter. And yet, I was sharper than ever. I didn't drink to forget, I tasted to remember. The entree was set down before me, a delicate composition of seared lamb over parsnip puree with glazed figs and a drizzle of truffle jus. My family barely paused before tearing into their plates like it was owed to them. Elaine lifted her fork with a delighted gasp. "Now this is divine," she said, dabbing delicately at her lips with a linen napkin. "Whoever runs this place really understands flavor." I tilted my head and gave her a small, knowing smile. She didn't catch it. Of course she didn't. Richard, who'd been occupied with his wine, raised a brow. Finally, someone in Boston worth paying for. These days, restaurants are all show and no soul. I almost laughed. He'd once told me that cooking was for the unambitious, what people do before they fail at something smarter. I remembered every syllable. Camille glided into the room bearing a plate not set in front of anyone else. "Miss Carter," she said, placing it gently before me. "Chef Mateo asked if you'd mind sampling this. He's considering it for next month's rotation, and he values your palate." Every movement at the table slowed. Vanessa stopped mid-sentence, her fork suspended in the air. Wait. Why her? The moment bloomed with possibility. I didn't look directly at her. I turned to Camille and murmured, "Please thank Chef Mateo. He knows I like balance." Camille smiled with her eyes, the kind of smile that said more than words ever could. "Of course." Vanessa leaned toward Gavin, who had just entered with a refill of wine. "She's part of what food board?" Gavin didn't miss a beat. "Some guests are part of our culinary advisory group. We consult them on seasonal adjustments, ingredient sourcing, and guest experience feedback." I took a bite of the lamb dish Mateo had sent me. It was exquisite, intense, complex, yet restrained. I knew the flavor profile instantly. Rosemary oil we'd refined together. A play on something Ethan once developed before he left Boston. It tasted like quiet control. Richard set down his fork. "Advisory group," he echoed. "And no one thought to mention this to me?" I dabbed my napkin and met his eyes. "Because not everything revolves around your portfolio, Dad." The silence was not loud, but it was weighted. I could feel it pulling down the corners of Elaine's perfect smile. Richard looked like he'd bit into something sour. Vanessa, though, wasn't rattled. She was calculating. She grabbed the menu in front of her, flipping it over and scanning its back, searching. Her fingers moved faster with each second, like maybe, just maybe, the answers were in the print. But there was nothing there. No printed list, no course options, no wine pairings. It was a custom menu. Tailored. Controlled. Vanessa turned the page again, clearly hoping she'd missed something. Her brows furrowed as the unease settled behind her carefully sculpted face. She was reaching and finding air. Gavin, always impeccably, time-stepped forward. We find printed menus disrupt the flow of the evening. Each dish tonight was curated specifically for this party. He placed subtle emphasis on that word. Curated. Elaine blinked. Wait, but who decided that I offered no answer? I didn't need to. They still thought I was simply a guest. But this wasn't their dinner. It was mine. They called me poor. The waiter called me owner. The room had grown quieter. As the final dessert was served, a delicate arrangement of dark chocolate ganache with lavender creme resting on a gold-edged plate. The wine had softened them. Their posturing was beginning to loosen. Laughter came easier, if not entirely sincere. To them, the evening had peaked. To me, it was just beginning. The glow of Maison Élise had shifted from spectacle to intimacy. The chandelier overhead dimmed just slightly more. The candlelight flickered in perfect rhythm. It all felt rehearsed, which in many ways it was. I watched as Richard dabbed at his mouth, adjusting his cufflinks like he still expected someone to photograph him for a society column. Elaine leaned in toward Vanessa, whispering something with a half-smile. Probably another assessment of my dress or posture. She couldn't help herself. Camille returned with the receipt folder in her hand, pausing by my shoulder. But before she could speak, Gavin entered from the side hallway, steps quiet but deliberate. He approached the head of the table and inclined his head toward me. "Miss Carter," he said evenly, "Morgan Stanley has sent an updated acquisition proposal. They've raised their valuation on the Maison Élise group by 12%. They'd like an answer by Monday." Elaine's fork clattered against her plate. Richard's hand jerked slightly, his wine glass catching the candlelight in a sharp glint. He didn't speak. Not yet. I met Gavin's gaze calmly. "Tell them no. Again." Gavin nodded. "Understood. Shall I have the kitchen prepared for your walkthrough?" "Yes," I said, after dessert. He bowed slightly and turned away. Elaine was still frozen. Richard blinked. "What?" "What was that about Camille?" Stepped in, then placing the receipt folder gently in front of me, angled so the signature was clearly visible. Juliana Carter, owner. The word hung in the space like smoke. No one reached for the bill. They just stared. Vanessa was the first to speak. "Wait. What do you mean, owner?" Richard sat straighter. "This is some kind of joke." Gavin returned with perfect timing, voice firm but respectful. "No, sir. Juliana has owned the Maison Élise group for the past 18 months. Silence rippled outward, swallowing their confusion in waves. Elaine's mouth parted slightly. She looked at me like I was an apparition. Richard stared at the folder, his breath short. "But you dropped out. You—" I interrupted with a calm that came not from arrogance, but from years of choosing silence over spectacle. "You told me once our name meant something," I said, voice even. "You just never imagined it would mean anything because of me." I turned the receipt folder toward myself and signed it with a flourish. No hesitation. The servers reappeared, not rushed, not intrusive, but timed like clockwork. They cleared plates and refilled waters with quiet precision. Not one of them made eye contact with my family, but every one of them gave me a nod. The kind you give someone whose authority you respect without fear, without question. Elaine seemed smaller in her chair. Richard had gone pale. And Vanessa. Her fingers tapped the table, eyes darting across the room like it had morphed into something unfamiliar, because for her, it had. This wasn't just a restaurant anymore. It was a monument she didn't understand. I raised my glass slowly, letting the stem rest between my fingers. "You're welcome, by the way," I said, smiling faintly. "I've covered every dinner you've eaten here this past year. While they toasted their legacy, I stepped into mine, where the heat was real and the knives sharper. The swing door gave a gentle hiss as I pushed through, separating the polished illusion of the dining room from the world that pulsed behind it. Heat rose instantly, not just from open flames and simmering pans, but from motion intensity craft. The kitchen of Maison Élise was alive. Steel counters gleamed under precise light. Pans hissed spoons, clinked against ceramic, and the air smelled of butter, thyme, and purpose. It was chaos for the untrained eye, but to me, it was choreography. As I entered, the rhythm didn't stop, but it shifted. Sous chef stood taller, a baker subtly smoothed his apron. Respect was never announced. It revealed itself in movement. Chef Matteo turned from the line, wiping his hands. His eyes met mine, warm but focused. "Welcome back, boss." I gave a short nod. "How's the sear holding tonight?" "Perfect," he said. Even Gavin's smiling. That earned a faint chuckle from someone at the grill station. I walked the line slowly, scanning plating technique, checking portion size. One of the pastry chefs glanced at the clock nervously. I tapped the edge of a creme brulee and whispered, "Torch 10 seconds less." "Let the lavender speak." She nodded, cheeks pink with pride. Matteo followed behind me with a clipboard. "Next quarter's tasting menu is almost locked. We're debating whether to lead with white asparagus or switch to artichoke hearts." "Artichoke," I said immediately. "More texture? More edge?" He didn't question it, just made the note. We turned the corner toward my small office, tucked at the back, just past dry storage and the cooler. Gavin was already there, standing beside the desk with a controlled expression. He handed me a slim flash drive. "The file you asked for," he said low. "Recordings, schedules, transaction logs, everything." I took it and slid it into the drawer without looking at it yet. Behind me, Matteo stepped out. He knew when to give space. I sat down at the modest desk and opened the laptop. The menu was minimized. My inbox pinged with an unread message from Prescott and Hale, LLP. The subject line, "Carter Trust Documentation. Legal review confirmed." I didn't open that yet either. Instead, I reached beneath the desk to a locked drawer. The key had been on a chain around my neck since I signed my first investor document. The lock clicked open with a soft metallic snap. Inside, neatly kept between protective sleeves, was a manila folder I hadn't touched in over a year. On the label, Carter Trust, transfer authorization. The ink had barely faded. My signature was there, dated 18 months ago. But the real signature, the one that mattered, was my father's. He'd signed it, thinking I was liquidating a personal account to invest in a frivolous side venture. He never asked what the venture was. I held the folder in my hands, the weight of it familiar. This wasn't just about dinner. This was about years of silence. Years of being told that sweat wasn't feminine, that business was a man's domain, that I was a disappointment. I closed the folder and locked it away again. Gavin, still standing by the door, cleared his throat. "Vanessa's been circling. She tried asking Camille about you. Staff's tight-lipped, but she's digging." "Let her," I said without looking up. Gavin hesitated, then stepped closer. "Are you really going through with it?" I stood slow and deliberate. My reflection caught faintly in the chrome of the fridge, shoulders, squared eyes steady. "I'm not just going through with it," I said. "I'm going all the way." Vanessa always smiled when she planned something cruel. This morning, her lips were painted in a soft rose hue that might have looked warm to someone who didn't know her. But I'd seen that shade before, right before she convinced a cousin to cancel my catering booking without telling me. Right before she humiliated me at my father's retirement dinner with a speech about how some people peak in high school. That smile never meant kindness. We gathered at the family's country estate in Vermont, where fall didn't just arrive, it performed. Golden light spilled through antique windows. The table was dressed in embroidered linens. Cinnamon sticks bundled in twine sat beside every napkin. It was curated to look like unity, though no one here knew the real shape of it. Elaine sat beneath a massive oil painting of our great-grandfather, reading the newspaper, as if she hadn't noticed me enter. She had. She always noticed then, decided whether to acknowledge. Dean Carter, My uncle stood near the buffet helping himself to coffee. Of all the Carters, Dean was the most tolerable, less prone to posturing, more prone to noticing what others pretended not to. He offered me a quiet nod as I approached the table. Vanessa was already seated back straight, mimosa in hand, nails a perfect seasonal burgundy. She was in her element, surrounded by family attention and a fresh opportunity to wound. "Jules," she cooed like we hadn't spoken with claws just hours before you look rested. "Vermont agrees with you." I smiled. "Sleep helps." Dean raised an eyebrow but said nothing. The meal began: warm scones, a frittata studded with leeks, and goat cheese rosemary potatoes. I reached for the preserves just as Vanessa struck. "I was just telling Dean," she said sweetly, slicing into her pear, "how hard you worked after that scholarship loss." Elaine glanced up for the first time. Dean's coffee paused mid-air. "It must have been devastating," Vanessa continued. "But you managed. I suppose money helps patch those kinds of holes, doesn't it?" I stirred honey into my tea slowly. My silence wasn't weakness. It was studied control. I wanted her to keep talking. She always did more damage when she thought no one could stop her. Dean set down his cup. "Funny. I thought Jules left the family trust years ago." Vanessa blinked just once. "Well, who really leaves?" "It's all symbolic, right?" I slid the butter toward Dean. "Some traditions deserve to be broken." My phone buzzed against my leg. I glanced at the screen. "Lila, Vanessa just posted a story about your miraculous comeback. Hashtag stolen success." "Want me to screenshot?" I tapped back one word. Vanessa didn't know Lila existed in this world. That made Lila powerful. Elaine complimented the kitchen. Dean made a comment about the maple syrup being from Canada this time. But Vanessa couldn't let silence win. She leaned in chin high. "You know," she said, voice sugar dipped, "you've certainly bounced back. New clothes, new attitude. Must be nice having access again." I met her gaze, then turned to my plate. I pressed the side of my knife gently into the edge of my toast, calm and deliberate. "Interesting assumption," I murmured. "Oh, come now," she said, laughing lightly. "Are we pretending now? You always knew how to leverage your last name. It's Carter blood that brought you back in." The silence around the table tightened, like everyone felt something shift. I leaned in just enough so only she could hear me. "You're so sure I used Carter money?" I said softly. "You've never thought to check where your inheritance went." Her fork froze mid-air. She laughed, but it was brittle. "What do you mean, my inheritance?" I didn't answer. I leaned back, took a sip of my tea, and let the silence swallow her question whole. Outside leaves fell like secrets from the trees, quiet and unstoppable. Dean glanced between us, brows furrowing. Vanessa stared at me, the cracks in her confidence widening her poised exterior no longer so smooth. And that smile finally began to fade. They trusted lawyers. I trusted evidence. Nathaniel Reed's office didn't feel like a war room. It felt like a gentleman's study, a place for strategy, not bloodshed. Warm mahogany shelves lined the walls full of leather-bound contracts and outdated tax codes. A decanter of scotch rested near the window. It was the kind of room where men like my father felt safe, convinced the space respected their money. I didn't need the room to respect me. I needed it to listen. Nathaniel sat across from me, reading the document I'd brought with a precision that made me grateful all over again for choosing him. He was discreet, meticulous, and most importantly, unconnected to the Carter web. "Where did you find this?" he asked without looking up. "My grandfather's safe deposit box," I replied. "He left me the key before he died, said it contained family things." Turns out he meant family lies. Nathaniel nodded slowly, adjusting his glasses as he flipped a page. "This is a trust amendment, dated 5 years ago. It states Richard Carter temporarily reassigned full rights to the Vermont estate to Vanessa Carter, citing consolidation of asset portfolios. And this," he tapped the lower right corner, "is your signature. Except it's not." He looked up, then eyebrows raised. "You're sure I've signed enough contracts to recognize my own penmanship?" I was living in France the week this was allegedly signed. He leaned back in his chair, brows knitting together. That means your father or someone close to him forged a power of attorney to move real estate under Vanessa's name. Exactly. There was no vindictive joy in saying it, just clarity, like finally seeing the full shape of a storm after years of walking in rain. I continued. Vanessa has no idea. She thinks she inherited the property. She doesn't know it was a transfer built on fraud. Nathaniel sighed, steepling his fingers. They gambled you'd never find this, that you'd stay distant, self-exiled. They were half right. My phone buzzed. A text from Gavin. Gavin Carter family board meeting set for Friday. They think it's about regional expansion. I smiled. Perfect. I'll give them something worth expanding. Nathaniel smiled faintly, almost cautiously. You're planning to bring this up at the meeting? I shook my head. Not directly. I'll let the freeze speak for itself. He turned to his laptop and began drafting. We'll need to file a motion to suspend disbursements from the Carter Trust. If we introduce this amendment alongside a request for a forensic audit, they won't be able to move a cent until it's resolved. Good, I said. Let them feel what I felt. Uncertainty. Powerlessness. Nathaniel paused his typing. Juliana, this is going to cause real damage, possibly irreparable. I looked at him steady. They caused the damage. I'm just making it visible. He resumed typing. The sound of keystrokes was like a clock ticking down to detonation. As he printed the motion, I stood and walked to the window. Boston's skyline stretched in front of me, crisp and clean under the October sun. For a moment, I let myself imagine the look on my father's face when his accounts froze mid-disbursement. Not because I wanted revenge, but because I wanted acknowledgement, recognition, that I wasn't the child he could control with inheritance threats and cold glances. Nathaniel returned, sliding the motion across the table. It's ready. All we need is your signature. I read it once, then again, making sure every clause matched my intent. No loopholes, no mercy. My pen hit the page like a scalpel. He watched me finish, then folded the papers into a thick envelope. Once we file, there's no undoing this. I met his gaze without hesitation. Good. I'm done undoing myself for them. Sometimes silence is louder than any scream. The lounge at Maison Élise was unusually still. Rain tapped gently against the glass walls like it was trying not to interrupt. Low piano chords drifted from the corner, blending with the flicker of candlelight on polished marble. It was the kind of quiet that cloaked you, made you think you were safe, until the tension underneath started to hum. I sat alone at a corner table, nursing a glass of Bordeaux, watching droplets streak down the windows. It had been a long day. The motion was filed, the board meeting was scheduled, and the truth was finally moving like a slow earthquake beneath polished foundations. Gavin approached quietly, his face unreadable but tense. He stopped beside my table and lowered his voice. The lock on the kitchen wine cellar, he said, was found broken this afternoon. I didn't react at first, just swirled my wine. Anyone see what happened? One of the pastry staff said they saw Vanessa in the back hallway, said she looked agitated. That didn't surprise me. Vanessa had never liked losing, and for the first time in her life, she was losing without even understanding the game. Clean it up, I said calmly. Replace the lock. Quietly. He nodded. Of course. But she's here. I looked up sharply. What in the lobby? Said she wanted to speak with you. Alone. I studied Gavin's face, his careful neutrality. Then I sighed and stood. Send her in. She arrived moments later, dressed too carefully for it to be casual. Cream cashmere gold studs, not a hair out of place. Her heels clicked softly across the stone floor. She looked around the lounge like she was measuring it for something, maybe a story, maybe ammunition. Jewel, she said, a practiced smile tugging at her lips. This place really is beautiful. Thank you, I said. It functions better when people don't break into the cellar. Her smile didn't falter. Accidents happen. She sat down across from me, crossing her legs delicately, her hands folded just so. I've been thinking, she began, about everything, about us. There was a time I would have leaned in hungry for that word us, hoping she finally saw me as family. But tonight, I simply watched her, my expression still. We've always been different, she continued, voice soft. You liked solitude. I liked company. You were stubborn. I was strategic. I raised an eyebrow. Strategic. Vanessa tilted her head. That wasn't an insult. No, I said. Just an admission. She laughed too quickly. Maybe I didn't always handle things well. But Jules, maybe we could fix this. She leaned in slightly, her tone lowering like a secret. This lawsuit, Dad's health is already on the edge. You know that? If this drags on... My phone buzzed on the table. I didn't check it. You think I filed this because I care about winning? I asked. I filed it because I stopped caring what it costs them to learn the truth. Her smile cracked just a hair. She straightened. You're not the only one who lost things. I spent my life carrying expectations too, Jules. Difference is, I said evenly, you weaponized yours. My phone lit again. Voicemail. I played it on speaker without comment. Elaine's voice filled the space, crisp and composed. Juliana, I know you're upset, but this lawsuit, do you have any idea what it's doing to your father? He hasn't eaten in days. He can't sleep. This isn't how we handle things in this family. Click. The silence that followed was sharp. Vanessa blinked but said nothing. I let the words sit there between us, twice repeated in my mind. What it's doing to your father. Not a whisper about what they had done to me. I turned to her. You came here to beg or to bait Vanessa's mask? Slipped for half a second. You really think owning a restaurant makes you better than us? No, I said, setting down my glass. But watching you unravel in one does? She stood abruptly, her chair scraping. Her face flushed, not with embarrassment, but with the unfamiliar sting of not being in control. I gave you chances, Jules. More than I should have. You think this little empire makes you untouchable? I didn't flinch. No one's untouchable. Not even you. She stormed toward the entrance. Just before the door closed behind her, I heard it glass shattering. Gavin appeared seconds later, breath tight. Wine bottle. Smashed on the hallway tile. I'll take care of it. I didn't answer. I simply stared out at the rain. Behind her, a broken wine bottle bleeds down white tile. They gathered expecting wine and applause. I brought subpoenas. The Carter Foundation Gala was meant to be a polished redemption arc for Richard. A flurry of invitations, sleek press packets, whispers of legacy and philanthropy, all staged within Maison Élise's grand ballroom. The chandeliers gleamed above like interrogation lights in disguise. I watched from the mezzanine balcony where I could see every corner without being seen yet. Down below, camera crews set up along velvet-lined aisles. Servers moved through the crowd with trays of champagne, and I caught more than a few investors scanning the room like they were calculating net worths by wardrobe. My name wasn't in the printed itinerary, but it would be on everyone's lips by night's end. Nathaniel approached calm and focused, a man who knew the detonation schedule by heart. They're all here, he said quietly. Board members. Trust auditors, media outlets, some confirmed, some undercover. Good, I replied. Let's begin. From the stage, Richard stood tall tuxedo, pressed to perfection, voice smooth as he greeted guests. Tonight is about legacy, about gratitude, and about the future of our family's impact. Elaine beamed beside him, a queen proud of her king. Vanessa lingered a step behind, too polished to look anxious, but I could see the tension in her jaw. Maybe she sensed the air shifting. As the music faded, a spotlight moved across the room and then paused. And now, the announcer said we invite our co-sponsor for tonight's event to the stage. Richard blinked, lips parting. Ms. Juliana Carter. There it was. I stepped forward from the shadow's heels, clicking against the polished stairs. Murmurs rippled through the room. My dress was midnight blue, tailored sharp enough to cut diamonds. I didn't smile. I didn't need to. Richard turned toward me like someone recognizing a ghost too late. I took the mic with a steady hand. Thank you for joining us this evening. Tonight isn't just about generosity, it's about transparency and the courage it takes to restore what's been misused. As applause began, Nathaniel moved through the crowd like a conductor through a silent orchestra. He reached Richard and placed a sealed envelope into his hand. Richard looked down, then paled. It wasn't a donation. It was a notice of investigation. The Carter Trust was officially under legal review. I saw Elaine's smile twitch at the edges. Vanessa glanced around, calculating exits. I beat her to it. Outside the ballroom doors, I had personally briefed every major outlet. Forbes, The Globe, even a few gossip columnists with teeth. I gave them facts, not stories. The kind that made reputations shatter quietly under the weight of precision. Vanessa, trying to recover, stepped forward toward a reporter's mic. I just want to say, Lila appeared at her side, a glass of Prosecco in one hand, phone in the other. Your mic's still hot, Vanessa, she said sweetly. Might want to think before you speak. I almost laughed. Vanessa shrank slightly and moved back, her mask slipping. I stepped to the center of the stage again, letting silence stretch before I spoke. Some of you know me. Some only think you do. I'm Juliana Carter, and I'm here because silence is no longer an option. No one clapped. They were too stunned. Behind me, Gavin took the mic. His voice was smooth but carried weight. Please welcome, he said, the owner of this entire venue group, Ms. Juliana Carter. The shift was immediate. Heads turned, phones rose, someone gasped. Richard's face was stone. Elaine froze, lips parted. Vanessa's hand tightened around her champagne flute so hard her nail cracked. She leaned toward Richard and hissed, barely audible. But I saw it. She's not just back. She's ahead. They always feared scandal. I just gave it a stage. The air inside the conference suite at Maison Élise was thick with tension despite the scent of lemon oil on polished wood and the gentle hush of velvet-draped walls. This wasn't where the Carter Foundation typically held its quarterly meetings, but then again, nothing about tonight was typical. Outside, the media buzzed. Camera flashes flickered through frosted glass. Inside, silence reigned. I stood beside Nathaniel, our table laden with brown folders marked discreetly with Carter Trust logos. Each one bore the weight of years of signatures, forged clauses, buried assets misappropriated with confidence that no one would dare read the fine print. They weren't wrong. No one had dared. Until now. Board members filtered in, slowly casting confused glances at the change in venue. Richard walked in last, followed by Elaine and Vanessa. My father's eyes scanned the room. Why here? He asked, his voice low but sharp. Nathaniel handed him a copy of the agenda. Serene. Neutral ground. Ms. Carter requested it. Elaine gave a tight smile to the board, clearly, already crafting damage control in her mind. Vanessa took the seat directly across from me and smiled, the same saccharine tilt of her head she used when she was hiding something. Nathaniel stood. This meeting will address irregularities within the Carter Trust over the past 4 fiscal years. Each board member will receive documents detailing the issues for review. He began handing out the packets. Inside were notarized bank statements, email transcripts, and photocopies of the trust amendment, one bearing a signature that had never touched my hand. Richard barely glanced through his before scoffing. This is nonsense. Misinterpretations at best. Is that what you call forged power of attorney? I said calmly. Because I have the original right here. I pulled out the envelope. Nathaniel slid it across the table. The room was still, every eye trained on the seal as it broke the paper, whispering as it was drawn free. Signed authorization, Nathaniel read aloud. Transferring ownership of Juliana Carter's property rights to Vanessa Carter for temporary safekeeping. Dated 2 years ago. Signed using a power of attorney that was revoked 4 years prior. The silence was suffocating. Elaine's face had gone pale. Vanessa opened her mouth, then shut it again. My father's fists clenched atop the table. He still hadn't looked at me. I nodded at Nathaniel. He tapped his tablet and a small speaker on the table crackled to life. A familiar voice, Richard, spoke. We'll move the funds from her side of the trust. She never checks her statements. You said she doesn't even care about money, Vanessa replied. She won't notice. And by the time she does, it'll be invested back. Static. Then Richard again. She's always been sentimental. Not strategic. Just make it clean. I looked across at Vanessa. I notice now. Elaine finally spoke. Juliana, what is this accomplishing public humiliation? What's the point? I turned to the room. This is about correction. For years, I let them take what they wanted. Time, dignity, even trust. That ends tonight. Nathaniel placed a final document on the table. As of this morning, a motion to freeze the Carter Trust disbursements has been filed. A formal investigation into fiduciary fraud is underway. Gasps echoed from the board members. One coughed, another leaned back as though to disassociate. My voice remained steady. I'm not asking you to take sides. I'm asking you to read what's in front of you. Richard's jaw worked in silence. Vanessa stared at the table, her fingers twitching near the edge of her folder. I stood smoothing the front of my navy blazer. Consider this my resignation from silence. I turned toward the window, where the media waited like crows, sensing a shift in the wind. I'd spent years hiding, shrinking to fit their definition of me, but not anymore. One board member, an older woman who'd served on the foundation since I was 12, muttered just loud enough to hear, "She's not ruining the family, she's saving what's left." Turns out their legacy wasn't built on values, it was built on silence. By dawn, the headlines had turned venomous. Every news outlet from morning radio to online gossip blogs splashed the Carter name with scandal. It wasn't just the trust investigation anymore. It was tax evasion, nepotism, forged documents, pieces of a dynasty, unraveling stitch by stitch. Vanessa was ambushed outside her high-rise condo wearing oversized sunglasses and false bravado. Reporters surrounded her like bloodthirsty birds. Cameras flashed, microphones thrust forward. Did you forge your sister's signature on Carter Trust documents? Is it true your family used company funds for personal vacations? Ms. Carter is Maison Élise, really owned by Juliana. She forced a tight smile. I won't dignify these rumors. My family has always operated with integrity. But the audio of her conspiring with Richard had already gone viral. Every syllable, every manipulation. Integrity now was laughable. At the same hour, Richard sat in a deposition room that reeked of varnish and consequence. The lawyers pored over evidence pages of trust amendments, flagged transactions, inconsistencies in signature timestamps. This clause indicates a transfer authorized by Juliana Carter, the examiner said. But she was overseas the entire week. Care to explain that Richard's face twitched? It was delegated. There must have been a misunderstanding. Nathaniel didn't flinch. Delegated without consent is fraud. Silence fell. The only sound was the hum of the recorder. Meanwhile, Elaine paced in her kitchen in Cambridge, gripping a mug with trembling fingers. On her muted television screen, a panel dissecting her family's downfall. Unable to bear it, she called. "Juliana," she said, voice tight. "We didn't mean for this to get so far." I leaned against the glass wall at Maison Élise, watching rain streak down the surface like tears that couldn't decide where to land. "Didn't you?" I replied calmly. "You all had chances to stop it. Every one of you." Elaine exhaled shakily. "We can fix this, as a family." I almost laughed. "You fixed it years ago when you pretended I didn't exist. I'm just shining a light on the bill." She didn't respond. Not with a denial, not with guilt. Only a soft click as the call ended. Back inside, Gavin handed me a folder. Another one. I opened it to find a news article. Juliana Carter, the quiet billionaire behind Boston's elite culinary empire. The headline wasn't what caught my breath, it was the photo. A candid shot of me stepping out of the boardroom the day before, coat in hand, expression unreadable. The reporters around me looked stunned, like they finally saw who I really was. Vanessa did too. She watched that same video loop on her phone, rage clouding her face as reality clawed in. She flung the phone across the room, shattering it against the marble floor. For years, she'd built her world on the assumption I'd stay small, quiet, and out of sight. But that version of me was gone. Richard, meanwhile, had lawyered up again. Anonymous leaks flooded the press, falsified reports, questionable donations, staff mistreatment. Investors backed away, boards convened emergency meetings. The empire he protected with lies was collapsing under truth. And I returned to the kitchen. Chef Mateo grinned when he saw me, ready for tonight's rotation. More than ever. The sous chefs glanced up from their stations, nodding respectfully. The knives glinted under warm, light pans hissed in welcome, and the space felt alive, mine. My phone buzzed. One new message. Vanessa. You'll regret this. I didn't read the rest. I deleted it without a second thought. She had no idea. I wasn't finished yet. What they built on appearances is now buried under facts. The morning sun filtered softly through the tall windows of Maison Élise. The restaurant was quiet, just the way I liked it, before the rush, before the plates, before the expectations. Gavin stood by the host's podium, holding a manila envelope with the same quiet reverence someone might reserve for a final verdict. "It's over," he said, offering it to me with both hands. "The Carter Trust has officially dissolved. Several properties were liquidated yesterday, payouts halted, and the board voted to remove Richard permanently from anything tied to the family foundation." I took the folder, glanced at the stamped signatures inside, and let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. No fanfare, no fireworks, just an ending. Clean, just. "I thought I'd feel more," I murmured. "You do?" Gavin said, "Just not where they can see it." Later that afternoon, I slipped into the far corner of Lila's cafe, where the wood creaked just slightly under the velvet-backed chairs, and cinnamon clung to the air like a second skin. She sat down across from me with 2 glasses of wine, dark, rich, unapologetic. "They wanted to erase you," she said, swirling her glass slowly, "and instead, you rewrote the entire damn script." I chuckled, a real one this time. Not the brittle kind I used around my family. "I didn't plan it like this." "No," Lila said, raising her glass, "but you stayed long enough to finish it." We clinked without ceremony. Across town, the Carter estate sat shrouded in shadows, the shutters drawn like eyelids refusing to wake. The once perfectly trimmed hedges had grown wild. The silence that filled its halls wasn't peace, it was recoil. That morning, a thick envelope had arrived at the restaurant's back office, postmarked in Elaine's elegant hand. I hadn't expected an apology, and I wasn't disappointed. Inside were clipped photographs, Christmas morning's award ceremonies, a blurry Polaroid of me in a chef's hat at age 10, holding a tray of misshapen cookies no one had touched that day. No letter, no note, just a curated reel of memories meant perhaps to remind me of what once was, or what she thought I wanted back. I looked at the faces frozen in forced smiles, then placed the envelope gently into a drawer beneath the host's podium. Not out of sentiment, but closure. They could keep the narrative. I had the truth. Dean called later that evening. I hadn't heard his voice since the gala. "I won't take long," he began. "I just needed to say you were right. All those years we saw you as different. Not because you lacked something, but because you had what we didn't." I stayed quiet. Our name used to mean power, but watching you, I think you've redefined it. "No," I said gently. "I've just reclaimed it." He didn't argue. "I hope you find peace in this." "I already have," I replied. I ended the call without hesitation. There was no bitterness left, only stillness. That night, I stood just beyond the swing of the kitchen doors, watching Chef Mateo orchestrate the team like a symphony. He turned toward me, as if sensing my presence, wiping his hands on a clean towel, then approached with a raised eyebrow. "I heard you had something for me," he said. I pulled a folder from my coat. "I do." His brow furrowed as he opened it, his name on a title deed, notarized and sealed. "You're giving me the second location," he whispered. "You built it with me," I said. "You've earned it." I don't know what to say. "You already have. Every night you step into this kitchen and make it better than the day before." He pressed the folder to his chest like it held something sacred. "Thank you," he whispered. "Don't Thank me, I said. Just feed the people well. Later, I returned to Lila's cafe. She had closed up early lights, dimmed the street quiet. We sat by the window legs tucked under us, sipping what was left of the bottle we opened that afternoon. She turned to me. So what now? I leaned back, letting the silence stretch before answering. Now, I write the next course. Not just for the restaurant, not just for the brand, but for the girl who had been told to stay quiet, for the woman who had to fight to be seen, and for every legacy built not on appearance, but on truth. The dust had settled, and beneath it, I stood whole, clear, and finally, free. They erased me for years. I took my time and took it all back. Autumn in Waverly had a way of softening even the harshest edges. The trees along Crescent Lane flared in amber and crimson leaves, drifting like forgotten apologies. I walked slowly, deliberately, letting the wind tug at my coat, letting memory guide my feet. The street hadn't changed much, but I had. The Carter house came into view like a relic. Once the pride of the block, it now sat quietly decaying behind a sagging fence and an overgrown lawn. The shutters hung, crooked, the paint had dulled, and a final foreclosure notice fluttered in the wind like a white flag. It used to symbolize power, discipline, reputation. Now, it was just a shell. I walked through the side gate, still sticking at the hinge, and stepped through the back door that was unsurprisingly unlocked. The house smelled like dust, faint perfume, and old air. No one lived here anymore. Just the past. In the kitchen, everything was cleaner than I expected. Someone had wiped the counters, maybe in an attempt to erase history. But the scuff marks remained. The memory of Elaine's voice criticizing the mess I made, learning to cook, lingered in the corners like grease. I opened the bottom drawer by instinct. It stuck for a moment, then gave way with a groan. There it was, my childhood recipe box. Wooden, scratched, barely held together by the same glitter stickers I'd used at age 9. Jules' first tastes was still legible in my shaky marker handwriting. I hadn't seen it in 20 years. Inside the cinnamon muffin recipe I ruined on my 12th birthday. A smear of chocolate still stained the double fudge brownie card. And coke au vin. Ethan's favorite, the one he asked for when he was homesick, the one he said made him feel safe. I held the box tightly and walked back out. Past the living room where we never celebrated me. Past the staircase I once sat on, listening to Vanessa be praised for things I taught her. That night I didn't go home. I went to Maison Élise. The restaurant was quiet, the main lights dimmed. Staff had finished cleanup, and the air was still warm with echoes of laughter. I entered through the back kitchen, the real kitchen. The one not shown to the public, the one where dreams were kneaded, sautéed, and plated under pressure. I tied on my apron, rolled up my sleeves, began. The rhythm came back easily, garlic sizzling in butter, shallots chopped thin, carrots and mushrooms softening. The wine hit the pan with a hiss, releasing a fragrance that pulled something deep from my chest. Coq au vin wasn't just a dish, it was a memory. A promise, a bridge between the girl I had been and the woman I had become. I plated it without flourish. Sat at the prep counter, elbows on cool stainless steel. Took a bite. The flavor wasn't perfect, but it was real. It was mine. I wasn't cooking to impress. I was cooking to reclaim. Laughter echoed from the main kitchen. Mateo telling a joke too loudly, Gavin groaning in response. My team. My family. I didn't move, just listened, letting their joy settle around me. Later, I walked into my office and saw my apron hanging by the door, frayed at the edges, stained with spice and memory. I took it down, folded it gently, and placed it next to the recipe box on the desk. Not surrender. Transition. I opened the lid one last time and flipped through the cards. And then nestled between two blank ones, I found something new. A cream card. Crisp. Clean handwriting? For Jules. From someone who always believed you would rise. No signature. I stared at it, throat tightening. It could have been Ethan, Mateo, maybe even Lila, or no one I knew. But it didn't matter. The words felt like a hand on my shoulder, steady and sure. They erased me for years. I took my time and took it all back. And that was enough. They used to call me a disappointment. Now they can't say my name without consequence. Maison Juliana opened to a quiet hum of anticipation. The modern brass fixtures gleamed under soft pendant lights. Fresh-cut eucalyptus drifted through the air, subtle but grounding. Unlike Maison Élise, there were no chandeliers, no echoes of pretension, just warm textures, open space, and quiet confidence. And no grand announcement. Just the slow, deliberate opening of double doors. I stood off to the side. Not on a platform, not under a spotlight. Gavin gave me a short nod from across the room, adjusting the cuff of his pressed shirt as he ushered the first guests in. Chef Mateo emerged briefly from the kitchen flour dust on his apron, pride in his eyes, and disappeared just as fast. Every table bore a single card cream with embossed gold, "The Journey." No need for menus. Each course unfolded like memory fennel and fig to start warm heirloom tomatoes with burrata and olive oil, chilled just enough to tease the tongue. The entree was lamb, slow roasted over rosemary smoke, Ethan's favorite method. I hadn't included his name. I didn't need to. The flavor carried him forward. A group of local journalists settled in quietly. One leaned toward another and whispered, "Is this the Jules Carter?" Everyone underestimated. Gavin passed by half hearing it and didn't pause. "Not anymore," he said without looking back. Across the room, I caught a glimpse of Dean slipping in. He wore no expression of allegiance, just silent presence. That was enough. No press, no Elaine, no Vanessa, just the people who had shown up without conditions. I stepped into the office briefly away from the guests. The walls were still bare, paint still holding the smell of new beginnings. On the desk sat the final brass plaque just delivered that morning: Founder, Chef, Survivor. I ran my fingers over the letters, not out of pride, but proof. My hand trembled just slightly as I picked up the pen. With calm, I signed the final inventory check, Juliana Carter. Not Jules, not Ms. J. Carter, not the girl they scoffed at during trust fund meetings or ignored during fundraisers. Just me, whole, entire, unapologetic. Behind me, laughter rose from the kitchen staff taking turns tasting the new seasonal sorbet. No one waited for permission. No one asked if it was okay. I liked it that way. I didn't interrupt. I listened. The office door clicked shut with a firm but gentle sound. I locked it not to keep anyone out, but to keep the past exactly where it belonged behind me. I returned to the dining floor where Lila was already swirling her wine at the bar, eyes darting around with that familiar gleam of subtle mischief. She leaned in just enough for me to hear over the quiet jazz drifting through the speakers. "Think your family will show up?" I didn't flinch. I smiled. Let them. They'll need a reservation. They called me a disappointment, a shadow, a name they only uttered when they needed someone to blame. But I rose quietly, steadily, and now I stand on my own name. If you've ever been dismissed, silenced, or made to feel small, I hope you see yourself in my story. I didn't need revenge. I needed clarity, courage, and time, and I found them. Leave me a comment. Tell me when you took your power back. I want to hear it. Let's build a space where rising in silence is still rising, where survival is honored, and where legacy is rewritten our way. If I could offer any advice, it's this: don't wait for their apology to begin your healing. Sometimes closure comes not in words, but in walking away stronger. Protect your peace like it's priceless, because it is. Reclaim your narrative even if you have to do it alone. And when the day comes that your voice shakes the room, don't shout. Speak calmly. Let your presence say what they never allowed you to. You don't need to prove your worth to those who once refused to see it. Let them watch. Let them learn. And most of all, let them wonder.